That land is for Laide.
Some things people inherit are more than property. For Laide Akinola, it was a piece of land on the outskirts of Abuja, but to her, it was something far heavier than soil and boundaries. It was her father. 7 years ago, Chief Akinola passed away after a brief illness that no one in the family saw coming. One moment he was giving instructions about business and family matters, the next he was gone. The grief left a silence in their home that never truly disappeared. When his will was read, there was no argument about who got what. Her 4 brothers received houses and established properties. Laide received 1 parcel of land. At the time, some relatives whispered about fairness, but Chief Akinola had already made his decision clear before his death. That land is for Laide, he had said. She will understand its value when the time comes. Laide did not understand immediately. The land was empty, quiet, and far from development. No structure. No fence. Just open ground under the wide Abuja sky. But her father had always seen things before others did. So she kept it. And she protected it. Years passed, and life slowly moved forward. Laide worked in Abuja, building a steady routine around discipline and quiet ambition. She was not loud about her dreams. She did not rush life. But she always had one clear vision in her heart. One day, she would build rental apartments on her father's land. Not for luxury or show but for future security. For a life that could stand on its own. Every month, she saved a little from her salary. Sometimes it was small, sometimes barely enough, but she never stopped. Even when expenses increased, even when life became demanding, she stayed committed to that one plan. The land remained untouched, waiting patiently. On some weekends, she would look at the documents in a brown envelope and imagine what would stand there one day. A small gate. A driveway. A building with tenants coming and going. It made her feel connected to her father in a way nothing else did. Because this was not just an inheritance. It was his final intention for her future. And in the middle of all this quiet planning, life was about to introduce her to someone who would feel like the beginning of something new. Someone who would walk into her life gently, without noise or warning. Someone named Adewale. Laide met Adewale on a Saturday. She almost didn't step outside. A friend had insisted on a small birthday gathering in Abuja. Laide was tired, her mind filled with work stress and unfinished tasks, but she went anyway just to avoid another round of persuasion. She didn't expect anything significant from the day. Just food, laughter, and a quick return home. Then she saw him. Adewale was not the type to demand attention. He didn't enter the room loudly or try to dominate conversations. He simply existed in a way that made people notice. They were introduced briefly, almost casually. Laide didn't think much of it after that. But Adewale did. He asked for her number later that evening through a mutual friend, and what started as one polite message became something more consistent over time. At first, their conversations were short. How was your day? Did you eat? Hope work wasn't too stressful. Simple things. But somehow, those simple things became something Laide began to look forward to. Days turned into weeks. Weeks turned into a rhythm. Adewale had a way of listening that made Laide feel like her words mattered. When she talked about work, he paid attention. When she mentioned stress, he checked on her later. When she spoke about her father, he didn't rush the conversation or change the topic. He just listened. And slowly, without pressure or confusion, something began to grow between them. When they eventually started dating, it felt natural, like a continuation of conversations that had already been happening for months. Adewale was present in ways that felt reliable. He showed up on time. He remembered small details. He never made Laide feel like she had to compete for attention. Most importantly, he made her feel safe. Not in a dramatic, overwhelming way, but in a quiet, consistent way that made her lower her guard without realizing it. Her friends noticed how different she seemed. Less tense. More relaxed. Sometimes even smiling for no reason. "He seems like a good man," one of them said. And Laide agreed. Because everything she saw supported that conclusion. Months later, when Adewale proposed, there was no confusion in her heart. Just certainty. The wedding was simple but beautiful. Family, friends, laughter, and prayers that felt sincere. Nothing exaggerated. Nothing forced. Just two people starting a life together. After marriage, life settled into a calm routine. They built their home step by step. Morning conversations over breakfast. Evening talks about work. Small plans for the future that always included both of them. There were no big issues. No constant arguments. No signs of instability. If anything, their life felt too peaceful in a way that made others admire them. In the compound where they lived, people often mentioned them as an example of a good marriage. And Laide believed it too. Especially because Adewale never acted threatened by her ambitions. One evening, she shared something she had kept close for years. Her father's land. She brought out the brown envelope and placed it on the table. Adewale didn't interrupt. He simply watched as she explained its history and her long-term plan to build rental apartments. When she finished, he nodded slowly. "That's a good vision," he said. "You should do it." There was no hesitation in his voice. A few days later, she even took him to see the land. They stood there together under the Abuja sun, looking at empty ground that meant everything to her. Laide talked about where the building would stand, how the layout would look, and what she hoped to achieve. Adewale listened, hands in his pockets, nodding occasionally. "You've thought this through," he said eventually. Laide smiled. "I have to." He looked at her for a moment longer than usual, then glanced across the land again. "It will be something meaningful," he said. On their way home that day, Laide felt lighter than usual. As if everything in her life was finally aligning. A future she could build. A husband she could trust. A life that finally made sense. And as the car moved through the streets of Abuja, she leaned back quietly. After marriage, time has a way of settling into patterns. For Laide, life with Adewale became a rhythm she could almost predict. Work in the mornings. Calls during lunch breaks. Evening conversations at home. Weekend visits to family or quiet rest days where they barely left the house. It was not a flashy life, but it was a stable one. And stability, for Laide, was enough. She returned to her original plan with renewed focus. Every month, she continued saving for her father's land project. Even though construction was still far away, she had already started mentally preparing every detail. Architects she wanted to consult. The type of building. The cost estimation. The rental strategy. Adewale never discouraged her. In fact, he often encouraged her planning. "You're more serious about this than most investors," he once joked lightly. Laide smiled. "It's not just business. It's my father's land." "I know," he replied calmly. "And it will be worth it when you're ready." That kind of support made her trust deepen even further. There was something comforting about a husband who did not compete with her dreams. Someone who didn't question her ambitions. Someone who simply stood beside her. As months passed, their marriage blended into everyday life in a way that felt natural. There were no dramatic highs or lows. Just quiet companionship. They built small routines together. Grocery shopping on Saturdays. Late night TV when they were both tired. Small jokes during dinner. Shared silence that didn't feel awkward. Even their families noticed the harmony. God has blessed you with peace, Laide's mother would often say. And Laide would agree. Because that was exactly what it felt like. Peace. One evening, after returning from work, Laide sat in the living room going through her savings records on her phone. The numbers were finally beginning to look promising. Not enough for construction yet, but close enough that she could start serious planning. Adewale walked in later, loosening his tie. "You look focused," he said. "I'm calculating," she replied. "Still your land project?" She nodded. He sat beside her without hesitation. "How much more do you need?" Laide sighed. "Still a bit. But I'm getting there." Adewale nodded slowly, like he understood the weight behind her words. "You'll get there," he said. "And when you do, I'll be there with you." Laide didn't think much of the statement at the time. It felt like a normal husband's reassurance. But she held on to it anyway. Because it felt good to hear. Days turned into weeks, and life continued in its predictable calmness. Yet, slowly, small things began to shift in ways that were easy to ignore at first. Adewale started spending more time on his phone. Sometimes stepping out to take calls. Sometimes going quiet mid-conversation, then returning with a smile that didn't quite match his eyes. He became slightly more distracted. Not enough to cause alarm. Just enough to be noticed if you were paying attention. But Laide wasn't suspicious. Not yet. Because everything else in her life still felt steady. Her marriage was stable. Her plans were moving forward. Her husband still held her hand the same way he always had. And the land was still waiting. Untouched. Just like before. Life in Abuja continued in its usual pace. Traffic in the mornings, work pressure during the day, and the soft relief of returning home in the evening. Adewale was still Adewale. He still greeted her warmly when she came back from work. Still asked if she had eaten. Still sat beside her during dinner like nothing had changed. But small things have a way of existing quietly before they become impossible to ignore. The first thing Laide noticed was the phone calls. He would step away sometimes. Just briefly. "Let me take this," he would say, walking toward the balcony or another room. At first, she assumed it was work. Adewale was in a demanding field, so it made sense. But the frequency increased. Then there were the moments of silence. Times when she would speak and he would respond a second too late, as if his attention had been pulled somewhere else and he was trying to return quickly. "Did you hear me?" she asked once, lightly. "Yes," he replied immediately, smiling. "I did." And she let it go. One evening, while they were having dinner, Adewale's phone rang again. He looked at the screen. Paused. Then stood up.
I'll be back.
"I'll be back," he said. Laide nodded without thinking much of it. But this time, she noticed something different. The call wasn't work-related tone. He wasn't discussing deadlines or contracts. His voice was lower. More careful. Like he didn't want to be overheard. Laide sat alone at the table, staring at her plate while the sound of his voice faded into the distance. When he returned, he was smiling again. "Work issues," he said casually, sitting back down. Laide nodded. But something in her chest tightened slightly. A faint discomfort she couldn't explain. She chose not to question it. Because questioning would mean assuming something was wrong. And everything in her life still looked right. Their home was still peaceful. Their conversations were still warm. Their marriage was still intact. Even Adewale still showed affection in the same quiet ways he always had. But sometimes, peace doesn't break loudly. Sometimes, it shifts so subtly that you only realize something has changed when you look back later. Adewale also began working slightly longer hours. Some nights, he came home later than usual. He always had explanations. Traffic, meetings, unexpected delays. And Laide, trusting as always, accepted them without pushing further. Still, one evening, something small happened that stayed with her longer than expected. She was in the living room when Adewale left his phone on the couch and stepped into the kitchen. The screen lit up. A message preview appeared. Laide didn't mean to look. It simply caught her attention. A name she didn't recognize. Followed by a message that disappeared too quickly for her to fully read. She blinked, looked away, and told herself it was nothing. When Adewale returned, he picked up the phone immediately. Almost instinctively. "Someone texted you," Laide said casually. He glanced at her. Then at the phone. "Oh," he said. "Just work stuff." And that was it. No further explanation. That night, Laide lay in bed staring at the ceiling while Adewale slept beside her. For the first time in a long time, her mind didn't feel completely quiet. Not because she had answers, but because, for the first time, she had questions she didn't know how to ask. And questions, once they begin, rarely stay small for long. Laide almost didn't go to the land that morning. If anything had felt different about her life lately, it was not enough to push her into panic. Just more questions, nothing she could clearly explain. But that morning, something inside her insisted she go. She told Adewale she wanted to check the land. He nodded like it was the most normal thing in the world. "Do you want me to come with you?" he asked. Laide shook her head gently. "No, I'll just go and come back quickly." Adewale smiled. "All right. Be careful." The drive felt longer than usual, even though nothing about the route had changed. Abuja roads were busy as always, filled with movement and noise, but Laide's mind felt strangely quiet. When she finally arrived, she paid the driver and stepped out. The moment her feet touched the ground, something felt off. Not immediately obvious. Just different. She walked forward slowly. And then she saw it. For a few seconds, she simply stood still, trying to process what her eyes were telling her. There were workers on her land. Real workers. Construction had already started. Laide blinked. Then she took a few steps forward, her heartbeat beginning to rise. No one had informed her. A man in a reflective vest approached her. "Madam, please, you can't stand there," he said politely. Laide stared at him. "Excuse me. This is a private site," he repeated. "Work is ongoing." Something in her mind struggled to connect the words. Private site. Ongoing work. Her land. She swallowed slowly. "Who owns this land?" The man checked a clipboard, then pointed toward a small office container nearby. "Emeka Nwosu," he said. The name didn't immediately register. Then it did. And when it did, it felt like something inside her paused. Emeka Nwosu. A man she knew. A man she had met before. A man who had been in her home. Laide walked toward the container without saying another word. Her steps were steady, but her mind was beginning to catch up with something it refused to accept. Inside, another man sat behind a desk. When he saw her, he stood politely. "Good morning," he said. Laide didn't return the greeting. "I'm the owner of this land," she said calmly, placing her voice carefully so it wouldn't shake. The man frowned slightly. "Madam, according to our documents, this land was legally purchased months ago." Laide felt her throat tighten. "Purchased from who?" she asked. The man hesitated for a moment, then opened a file and turned it toward her. She looked down. Her name was not there. Instead, there were signatures she did not recognize. And one name that made her stomach drop. Adewale Ajayi. For a moment, the world didn't make sense. The noise outside became distant. The air felt heavier. Laide stared at the paper like it might change if she looked long enough. But it didn't. The signature remained. Her fingers slowly left the edge of the desk. She didn't speak. She didn't cry. She simply turned around and walked out of the container. And as she stood outside her father's land, watching strangers reshape what belonged to her, one truth began forming in her mind. The person she trusted most had touched her future without telling her. And everything was about to change. Laide did not go home immediately. She sat inside a quiet corner of a small roadside shop near the land, staring at nothing in particular. Her phone was in her hand, but she wasn't scrolling. She was thinking, trying to make sense of what she had seen. The documents. The signature. Adewale's name. Each thought collided with the next, but none of them formed anything solid enough to hold on to. It felt unreal. Like a mistake. Like something that would correct itself if she just waited long enough. But deep down, she knew it wouldn't. When she finally stood up, she didn't call Adewale. Not yet. Instead, she went straight to the lawyer her father had once used for family matters. A quiet man who still remembered Chief Akinola. He welcomed her with respect, but his expression changed the moment she explained why she was there. He asked for the documents she had seen. She showed him everything. Silence filled the room as he reviewed them carefully. The longer he looked, the more still his face became. When he finally spoke, his voice was calm, but firm. "Madam Laide, this transfer is not valid." She blinked. "What do you mean?" "The signatures are not consistent with the original land ownership file your father registered. And this consent document here," he tapped the paper, "was never signed by you." Laide felt her hands go cold. "So how did they sell it?" she asked quietly. The lawyer leaned back slightly. "That," he said carefully, "means someone forged authority documents to make the transaction appear legal." The words did not immediately sink in. Forged. Authority. Illegal. Slowly, the reality began to take shape. Someone had not only taken her land. They had built a system around it to make it look legitimate. Laide's voice dropped. "Who would do something like that?" The lawyer hesitated for a moment before answering. "You should speak to your husband." The room went quiet again. That sentence stayed in the air longer than anything else. Her husband. Adewale. Laide stood up slowly, as if her body was moving before her mind agreed. She left the office without saying thank you. Outside, the sun was still bright. People were still walking. Cars were still moving. But nothing felt normal anymore. When she reached home that evening, Adewale was already there. Sitting on the couch. Relaxed. Watching television like it was just another ordinary day. He looked up when she entered. "Welcome," he said warmly. "How was your day?" Laide stood near the door for a moment. Just watching him. Trying to find something in his face. Anything. He smiled when she didn't respond immediately. "Is everything okay?" he asked. That was when something inside her shifted. She walked slowly toward him. Adewale turned down the volume of the TV. "Laide," he said again, softer now. She stopped in front of him. For a few seconds, neither of them spoke. Then she asked the question that had been building inside her since morning. "Did you sell my land?" Adewale's expression didn't change immediately. Just a brief pause. The kind of pause people take when they are deciding what version of a truth to give. And in that silence, Laide already understood. Something irreversible had begun. For a moment, the room felt suspended. The television still hummed softly in the background, but neither of them seemed to hear it anymore. Laide stood still, watching Adewale's face as if it might finally reveal the truth on its own. He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he leaned back slightly, exhaling through his nose like the question itself was inconvenient. "Laide," he said slowly. That single word carried more weight than anything else he could have said. She didn't move. "Answer me." Adewale looked at her properly now. The calm expression he always wore in difficult moments was still there, but something behind it had shifted. "I was going to tell you," he said finally. Laide blinked once. "That is not my question," she replied quietly. "Did you sell my land?" A pause. Longer this time. Then he nodded. "Yes." The word did not come with an explanation. Laide felt her chest tighten, but she didn't collapse. She didn't scream. She didn't cry. Not yet. "Why?" she asked. Adewale stood up slowly, as if trying to control the space between them. "It was complicated," he said. Laide let out a small, bitter laugh. "Complicated?" He continued, "I needed money. It wasn't supposed to go like this." "You forged my documents," she said, her voice steady but sharper now. Adewale looked away briefly. "I handled it," he replied. That sentence broke something in her. Not because of what it meant, but because of how casually it was said. "I handled it." Like her inheritance was a problem to solve. Like her father's legacy was an inconvenience. Laide stepped back slowly. "Where is the money?" she asked. Adewale didn't answer immediately. That silence was enough. She nodded slightly, as if confirming something to herself. Then she turned and walked out of the house. Within an hour, she was at the police station. The officers on duty greeted her casually. "I want to report a case," she said. Her voice was controlled. One of the officers gestured for her to sit. She explained everything. The land. The documents. The forged signatures. Adewale. By the time she finished, one officer had already stepped away to make a call. "What is the name of the suspect?" another asked. Laide didn't hesitate. "Adewale Ajayi." Within hours, a team was dispatched. By evening, Adewale was brought in. When the police arrived, the compound had already started gathering people who had heard whispers of what was happening. Some were shocked. Some refused to believe it. "Not Adewale," one neighbor kept saying. "Impossible." Laide sat on a bench, watching from a distance as he was taken into questioning. For the first time since the land discovery, she felt something break through her control. The realization that the man she had built her life with was now on the other side of a police report she filed herself. And as Adewale looked toward her briefly before being led away, she did not look away. She simply watched. Because now, there was no turning back. The compound was louder than usual that night. Whispers moved from one balcony to another. Curtains were slightly pulled aside as neighbors pretended not to be watching while watching everything. Adewale Ajayi being taken by the police had turned a quiet Abuja street into a place of speculation. But inside all the noise, Laide felt something very different. Silence. A heavy silence that sits inside the body and refuses to leave. She stayed at home for most of the evening, not answering calls, not responding to messages. Her phone kept buzzing, but she couldn't bring herself to engage with any of it. Everyone had questions. She had none left to ask. At least, that's what she thought. Until the investigation began to unfold. The next morning, officers returned with updates. Adewale had not resisted questioning. He had spoken calmly, as if he had already prepared himself for this moment long before it arrived. But what he revealed did not simplify the situation. It expanded it. Bank records showed transactions Laide had never seen. Loans she had no knowledge of. Debts that stretched further than she could have imagined. and accounts tied to names she did not recognize. One officer placed a file in front of her. "Madam," he said carefully, "this may not be the only issue." Laide looked up slowly. "What do you mean?" The officer hesitated. "Your husband appears to have been involved in multiple financial obligations before the land transaction." Laide's fingers tightened slightly on the edge of the table. "Obligations," she repeated. "There may be other assets or agreements you are not aware of." The words felt distant, like they belonged to someone else's life. But the more she listened, the clearer it became. Adewale's life had not been as simple as she believed. There were gaps, missing explanations, unseen pressures. And behind it all, a version of him she had never been introduced to. That evening, Laide was allowed to see him briefly during processing. He sat across from her in a small room, his hands resting calmly on the table. There was no chaos in his appearance, no visible panic. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then Adewale broke the silence. "I didn't plan for it to reach this point," he said quietly. Laide studied him carefully. "Then what did you plan for?" she asked. He looked down for a second before answering. "To fix it." A bitter smile crossed Laide's face. "You fixed it by selling my father's land." Adewale exhaled slowly. "It was collateral at first," he said. "Then things got worse." Laide's expression changed slightly. "Collateral," she repeated. He didn't answer immediately. Laide leaned back in her chair, her voice lower now. "So my life, my inheritance, my father's last gift, was just part of your debts?" Adewale didn't respond. Outside the room, time continued normally. Officers walked past. Phones rang. People spoke. But inside that small space, something had permanently shifted. Laide stood up slowly. She looked at him one last time. "I trusted you with everything," she said quietly. Adewale's eyes lifted slightly. "And you used it like it didn't belong to me." She turned toward the door. And before leaving, she added one final sentence. "I don't even know who you are anymore." Then she walked out. And for the first time since the beginning of her marriage, Adewale did not follow her with words. Court cases have a way of turning private pain into public truth. For Laide, the weeks that followed were a blur of statements, documents, and repeated explanations she never thought she would have to give about her own marriage. Each time she spoke, she felt less like a wife and more like a witness to a life that no longer belonged to her. The case against Adewale Ajayi moved steadily through investigation. Forgery, fraud, unauthorized land transfer, financial misconduct. Each charge added another layer to a story Laide never imagined she would be part of. But what hurt most was not the legal language. It was the familiarity of the man sitting across from her in court. Adewale no longer looked like the husband she married. Not because he had changed physically, but because the illusion had fully fallen away. No warmth, no softness. Just someone she once knew. The prosecution laid out everything clearly. The forged signatures, the land documents, the financial trails. Even Emeka Nosu was called in, confirming his involvement in the purchase and the pressure he had placed on Adewale during the transaction. Piece by piece, the truth became impossible to deny. Laide sat through every hearing quietly. She did not interrupt. She did not react. She simply listened. Because now, she needed to understand everything clearly. Completely. When Adewale was given the chance to speak in his defense, he stood slowly. For a brief moment, his eyes met Laide's. But she did not look away this time. "I never intended for it to destroy everything," he said. His voice was steady, but tired. "It started as a way to solve problems I thought I could fix. I made mistakes. I made bad decisions. And I hurt people I should have protected. Silence filled the room. But Laide did not soften. When the final judgment was delivered, the courtroom felt heavier than before. Adewale was found guilty on multiple counts. Sentenced according to the law. Emeka faced separate legal consequences for his role in the fraudulent acquisition. Laide did not celebrate. There was no victory in the feeling she carried. After the court proceedings ended, she returned to the land. For the first time since everything began, there were no workers. No machines. No noise. Just open ground under the Abuja sky. The same land her father had once given her. The same land that had been taken, twisted, and fought over. She walked slowly across it, stopping at the center. The wind moved gently across the space. And for the first time in a long time, she breathed without pressure. Her phone rang. A contractor she had once contacted months earlier, before everything collapsed. "Are you still planning to build?" he asked. Laide looked around the empty land. At everything it had been through. At everything it had survived. Then she answered softly. "Yes." Because this time, it was no longer just a dream. It was a decision. Months later, construction began. Each foundation block Laide felt like something being returned to its rightful place. And as Laide stood watching the early structure rise from the ground, she finally understood something her father had known all along. Some gifts are not just given for comfort. They are given so you can learn how to stand again after life tries to take everything away. And this time, she did.